Hey folks, Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. Welcome to another fantastic panel with Cracking the Comms Code. Today we're going to talk about how to speak C-suite and not just how to do it, but why it is now a core requirement for communicators. Not just an also thing to do, not just something you can learn later, but right now that you have to learn it. And we have Ellen, Conrad, and Sarah in three very different verticals who are all going to explain their experiences, their specific stories and case studies to show you how to make the business case for comms and being its involvement in C-suite decision making. So, Ellen, Conrad, Sarah, if you could briefly introduce yourselves.
Sure. Thanks for having me and us, Dustin. I'm Ellen O'Brien. I'm the founder of Hudsons Media, a media and speaker training consultancy that focuses mainly on helping healthcare leaders and helping them speak more effectively and authentically to a variety of audiences. But prior to starting my consultancy 5 years ago, I was on the corporate comms team at United Healthcare and Optum. And then prior to that, spent some time on the consumer PR agency side at Weber Shandwick.
Conrad?
Yeah, so Dustin, really excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me. When I started comms, Bill Clinton was starting his first term. We were dealing in emergencies with fax machines and landlines, and we were working to the evening news and the morning newspaper. And at the time, right, communications were really there to spin. Sometimes you'd hear it say, yeah, they needed us to put lipstick on the pig, but it was still the pig. And over time, I learned sometimes really the hard way that you had to speak to impact. And that's where you really had your value, and learning that language to speak to the C-suite about risk, opportunity, outcomes. And, since then, I became director of communications to a secretary of the interior, followed on as his chief of staff. I've now held several positions as CCO for a number of companies in Europe, US, and Canada, in a variety of sectors. And at the end of the day, when you peel back the layers of the onion, the C-suite are dealing basically with the same issue, whether you're in transportation, energy, defense, and many of the other sectors I've been in. So really happy. I think some takeaways for me, like a key things that communicators need to consider is you need to know the company's strategy better than their head of strategy. You need to understand the environment that you're operating in, and embed yourself across the functions. Be where people don't expect you to be, and ask the questions that people aren't expecting comms to ask. And then learn to speak the language of numbers. And finally, step out of your lane. If there's an opportunity, volunteer. And I'll be happy to jump into, those, what I consider the 5 keys to C-suite through the podcast.
All righty, and I'll go next. I'm Sarah Graham. I am the cybersecurity lead at a tech PR agency called Kickstand. I've really done it all. I started in consumer PR agency, but been an agency girl for life at least. But started in consumer and hospitality, moved to a more broad agency, and then went to focus in on tech, and that's what I've been really focused on the past 5 or 6 years. And then came to Kickstand to really hone in that focus even more into cybersecurity once I found a really big passion in it. And I think when it comes to talking to the C-suite at cybersecurity, there are a little bit of differences in the sense of how fast the news landscape is moving and how quickly they need results versus maybe some slower moving industries. And also there's the need to really build that trust with the C-level to make sure they know that you understand the complex landscape from like the tiniest intricacies. I can never say that word out loud, I swear. It sounds better in my head. And then also that you're constantly staying up to with the news. Like you have to be reading it every hour. Every hour it's changing messaging that could have resonated with their buyer an hour ago might not in 3 hours, depending on the latest Anthropic update. Meet those coming out, or even today with with that drop. So very excited to chat with everyone today and excited to be a part of all the amazing panelists. So
And so we originally started emailing what, about 3, 4 weeks ago, kind of got everyone together, and just was it earlier this week, late last week, the Wall Street Journal, the revenge of the publicist, which tells you they don't know the difference between a publicist, a PR person, and a CCO, but we'll move on from that. It was really interesting how they led with how the woman said, I want to be CCO. I'm not just going to be the head of marketing. I want to have this longer title that really belongs at the C-suite. And I can't imagine she just made that demand on its own, right? There has to be that business case made. And the argument, I think it was in paragraph 4 of the piece, leads on the fact that this goes back to actually speaking of Weber Shandwick. Weber Shandwick had a survey a year and a half ago that the majority of CEOs at a business conference were very concerned about brand risk from political leader attacks, terrorist attacks, and conflicts around the globe. But only 72% were confident that their comms team could handle it. So there was this pain point that people are having in the rise from COVID, AI, global supply chains, global conflicts, and comms people said, we can solve that for you. And that's not a comms argument. That's a business argument. And so, Ellen, you've worked, I think you said you worked at Weber Shandwick, correct?
Yes, I did.
And so you've gone from agency, you're now, you've gone in-house, now you're a consultant. You've gone across 3 different ways you've had to make the argument to the C-suite. How do you make your argument differently today than you did 10 years ago?
Well, I think 10 years ago, I didn't know as much as I know today. So I think every decade you add on to your resume helps a little bit. But I think I was just saying yesterday, actually, that in wanting to and beginning to work with a new executive, that trust that you develop with that leader or with a team of leaders can't be skipped over. I think that that's sometimes a difficulty, either on the agency side or in-house, where the communicator is brought in to execute rather than giving them the time to develop that relationship so that they know that leader or that team of leaders as well as their C-suite peers. So trust is earned. There is no shortcut to it. It can be tricky in a variety of situations to walk in and ask for that time or to set that time on their calendar. But little by little, going through crises with that leader or that team helps, just showcase your value, responding to their needs in a really smart way, in a really strategic way. All of those steps that we take as communicators really creates us as the trusted partner.
Conrad, you're in a very different space. I think you said in our prep call that you're with a fusion company right now. And I know you have your own consultancy, but this is what you're doing currently. And it sounds to me like that's I think a lot of communicators would be kind of intimidated by that. It sounds like a very niche space with maybe 12 customers across the whole country. But you said at the outset of your opening statement that it's the same conversation across verticals. Can you explain a little bit about that, how the universality of understanding the C-suite for communications people? And anyone who's watching, by the way, bring your questions to the comments. We don't want to just be the 4 of us talking, but please ask your questions, especially if you hear things that are specific pain points for you.
Yeah, so I think, Ellen really laid the groundwork for this, and the key word is trust, right? When you look at the C-suite, any C-suite, you're going to have the CEO, you're going to have a CFO, you're going to have a head of operations, HR. They all come, with their viewpoint, how they're supporting the business. As a communicator, you're often the only one bringing that outside voice. Not just thinking about your clients, but how are people going to react to announcements you've made or intentions you've indicated. And as I said earlier, by getting out of your lane and having those conversations with those function heads ahead of time and building a rapport with them, trust with them, and saying, have you considered this? Did you hear what happened here? right? And you're bringing value to the conversation. And the idea is the more that you're involved in that earlier, and Ellen, you mentioned this before, right? Not just coming in to execute, but actually being there when the decisions are being made and having them consider other points. You're now being true value. And you need to add to that, speaking to them in the terms that they understand, right? About what is the impact to the brand, what kind of hit might this be on the brand from a dollars perspective, right? How many clients they might lose if you do something, and what does that mean to your business turnover, right? So it like I said, it's getting out of your lane, being where you're not expected to be, having those conversations, so that when you're there, you're actually talking to those three things that they desperately want, which is what's the risk, what's the opportunity, and what could the outcome be, right? And that's very different than saying, hey, I'm going to post this, you're going to get so many likes, we've got all these followers. At the end of the day, that's not what they're concerned about, right? My first board meeting out of politics, there was really three subjects, right? One was, where are we with the money? How are we going to make more money? Oh, and let's start talking again about money, right? And so to me, immediately I understood I wasn't speaking their language. So how would I convert what I was bringing to that?
There, on the cybersecurity side, I have to think that, like with Fusion, a lot of people in healthcare seem to stay there. But you said I think you went from a more broad agency. Now you're really dialing into what you enjoy most. How has this allowed you, having that broader experience, allowed you to speak to cybersecurity? People will probably much more say nerdy than yourself and may not even understand. They may think PR is marketing. How do you get past those misunderstanding barriers?
I would say like the biggest difference that I've seen with more of a broader technology C-suite versus a cybersecurity C-suite is they have to move so incredibly fast in their workflows. That's the CEO. CEO's doing everything. I noticed you get more access with that CEO than maybe you would at other companies. Like they're way more involved. Some are even coming to like weekly PR meetings, which is really unheard of in other industries. So they really, one, prioritize it and are in the depths of their industry. But like you said, building that trust and really making sure you understand the intricacies and just like reading as much as you can and staying on top of the news. Just refreshing constantly. Bleeping computer, great one for me. I'm constantly refreshing it every day because they have it all. And they break down pretty much everything that could be a new business driver for that C-level. Or, the next big research project for them, which is it's just fun and exciting. So really loving the space.
One of the things I have an op-ed going on this topic. I led with how the first 3 years of my company, my business partner and I came up with a great tagline. We put you in the press. And in my political background, everyone loved that. Everyone was clamoring for that. And I remember the first year I went to a business club in Northern Virginia, lots of rich people. Like, great, this is a perfect audience. I didn't understand being raised by a serial entrepreneur who was very marketing savvy. I didn't realize that until they hit 50 million a year, most companies have no marketing and branding strategy. I just didn't know that. So I assumed that every small business owner understood comms, understood marketing. First mistake. Second mistake is I started talking about media coverage, getting you in the press, not what that's going to do. And so I remember just getting all these meetings and saying, they say, what do you do? Oh, we put you in the press. Great. Why? Because we're going to put you in the media, like, and get you in front of people. Great. Isn't that just marketing? Like, it was so frustrating. And 3 years in, I realized that was the problem. Because I was speaking to my pain point of wanting to get them in the press and get paid for it, not to their pain point. And so recently we had a sit down with an old client. They haven't signed we ended the relationship almost 6 years ago. We set up a good relationship. They have a new executive team. And they called us in. This is a government contractor, non-bank lender. Super financially nerdy. I'm a math nerd posing as a PR professional, so I was excited. And we sat down with them, and I didn't have to say much. And I want to bring this back around to everyone else here. I didn't have to say much, but I had to ask a lot. And so I think there's a lot of people watching who think they're not savvy about leadership, savvy about strategy, or savvy about math, who wonder, what can I say? And I distinctly remember the conversation that was going on. I looked at the director of sales and I said, hey, well, they said this thing, and this thing. How is that impacting the number of people that are coming, customers that are coming through your pipeline? And she said, actually, we're still chock full. And the CEO looked at me, looked over at one of his colleagues and went, that's a really good question. To me, it was just the logical sequence, the next thought. So I'd like each of you to address how important it is to ask questions and how important that is to belonging in the room, even if you don't have the answers.
So important. If I can just lead by saying, I think listening and asking questions as the communicator in the room is one of our biggest jobs. Again, back to what I said earlier, not necessarily going in ready to prove yourself vocally by saying, this is what we need to do, 1, 2, and 3. It's asking the questions. Maybe if it's valuable in your organization, after you spend some time listening and asking questions, pairing a question with a reflection on something that has happened in the business within recent memory. A lot of times at a large organization like the one I was at, a good way of a communicator getting to what we needed to know is, how is this different than what happened a few years ago? Or how is this different than how this segment handled this crisis? Or how is, pairing up with situations that they're familiar with, either within the company or within the industry as a whole, is a great way to do that. But couldn't agree more, Dustin. Asking those questions and listening is critically important.
Yeah, I'd say when it comes to cybersecurity, again, because it's constantly changing, you have to ask those questions. Now, again, with agentic AI and all those new versions coming out, comes the question a lot of cybersecurity's target audiences, or cybersecurity vendors' target audiences, is moving beyond security teams and CISOs and now into developers and CTOs. So making sure you're asking the questions of, who are your main buyers? Are you seeing that actual shift on your end, or is that just an industry trend we're seeing? And if so, what avenues are they coming through? A lot of them for the developers are coming through Reddit, X, Y, and Z. So really just figuring out which audience you need to tap in and exactly where they are from the sales perspective, so that you can make sure you strategically map your content to exactly where the buyer is.
And for me, it was one of the 5 key points that I said about building business acumen and bringing value to the business. And so it's embedding yourself across those functions, because ultimately that cross-functional insight that you mentioned, right, and going, that was a really good question, that builds influence and that builds trust. Right, so it's meeting with those players outside of that meeting, right? And instead of going in and saying, what can comms do for you? And then saying, well, I might need a news release, or I need a town hall, or, it'd be nice to have a brochure. It's asking them questions about their pain points, right? What's keeping you up at night? Where are your challenges? And by them expressing that, you can then turn around and propose solutions, instead of them saying, oh, let me grab something from, my PR 101 that I did when I was in university, and thinking of a product that you're going to give them, instead of you having those conversations saying, hey, when I was speaking with legal, I heard this. When I was speaking with sales, I heard this. How does that impact business development? Making those connections, because often the C-suite leaders are siloed. And by you showing up where you're not expecting, you can become that conduit to which you say, hey, I know they're dealing with this, they're dealing with that. And like I said, that cross-functional value that you bring really builds trust and influence.
Yeah, Conrad, if Sorry, Sarah. Just the one thing that you said that I couldn't agree with more, the what's keeping you up at night question. I ask that almost daily, either in that phrase, what's keeping you up at night, or what is the question you don't feel prepared to answer right now? And how can we as the comms team or me as the communicator help you work through that to get you to a spot that you will feel more comfortable? Go ahead, Sarah.
No, I was going to say something very similar. I think sometimes it can be difficult to ask those hard questions to the C-suite, but as Conrad and Elena both shared, it's imperative in order to build that trust. They're looking at us as strategic advisors. So we need to be able to push back on ideas that we know aren't going to resonate well. We're the experts there and be able to, yeah, just strategically push back when needed.
So I want to pivot directly to internal comms. Rachel Mayer said she recently joined a firm where she inherited internal comms that lacks strategy. And I'm going to ask this to all of you because I'm a PR guy, so I don't know anything about internal comms other than it exists. So what specific behaviors or proof points do you think helps IC leaders shift perception from being seen as order takers to being invited early as strategic partners? So again, what behaviors or proof points do you think helps IC leaders shift the perception from being seen, as you said, Conrad, or to make a brochure to being seen as a key partner?
Well, I can jump in on that one. In fact, I'm dealing with a client right now who is in the process of a merger. And so they're totally focused on their employees and how their current employees and how their future employees are going to react to that merger, right? So ultimately, your business is built on your employee base and what they do for you. And so you want to keep them informed, engaged, delivering on what you want them to deliver on, right? So this idea of internal comms coming again to leadership and saying, this is what your internal audience is thirsting for. This is what they need to hear. They don't want to see an org chart. They don't want to hear your business plan to the market. Talk to them, right? Turn it into, is my job safe? What are the growth opportunities here? How is my work connected to that strategy that I hear, and how is what I'm doing every day getting us closer to that? That's the value that internal communications bring. Again, it's translating that business speak, and you need to understand that business language, what the C-suite is talking about, and interpreting that into an internal communications language that keeps those employees connected and motivated and moving your company in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that there are so many instances, often my brain usually goes to the crisis side, but there are so many instances what is communicated internally is communicated externally. If the employees are not happy, the external stakeholders will catch wind of that. If employees are treated unfairly, external stakeholders will know about that. All of these internal, what can be looked at as sort of soft cultural, ways of doing business often have a ripple effect. And I think Rachel's question is really spot on because there can be a hierarchy of sorts at organizations where comms and marketing are pitted against each other, or internal and external are pitted against each other, or people are trying to find their way in the organization. But I think oftentimes it's showcasing that ripple effect. And sometimes that comes with a little bit of a reality check, a little bit of some scare tactics, because I know in my prior career, we had an internal employee email go external. I use that all the time in my media trainings where internal meetings are recorded by a disgruntled employee. And then the next thing you know, they're the front page leading story, or are being shared on TikTok and receive 3 million views in 24 hours. Like, this is happening to small, mid, large organizations, and it's creating some really negative consequences for what could be seen as a small internal problem that balloons out of control. So internal communicators have just as much, I would say, power over shaping what that becomes and the strength and the reputation of that company as external comms leaders do.
I would say one more thing is that your internal audience, they're your real brand ambassadors. And like you just said, Ellen, right? If you say something to the external market that they don't align with, they don't believe, given today's platforms and how those things spread, right? The external comms team, the investor relations team, the CEO might be out giving a whole bunch of speeches and talking about direction, but you start farming that stuff and looking for disgruntled employee statements, that can just blow the strategy right out of the water. Employees are your number one brand ambassador, and they need to be on board.
Right after departing, I heard screaming and I wasn't sure what was wrong. It turns out the almost 3-year-old doesn't want to come inside. So it sounds the same as if she fell down a flight of stairs. So I wasn't sure what happened. So the joys of 5 kids under 8. So one of the things too that I've really learned, again, on the PR side, but I think it applies to internal comms, is a proof point in behavior could be, hey, CEO, you're not the best person to speak on this issue. It might be a department head. It might even be empowering managers more to speak directly to the 12 people they're managing or 8 people they're managing. So on the internal comm side, how often do you all find, I guess I'll go to Sarah first, on the cyber side, how often do you find that there's an assumption that the C-suite has to be saying it? And how hard is it to get them to agree that a customer might be best for external, or an employee or a mid-level manager might be the best person for any number of reasons, rather than someone who has the letter C next to their name?
Yeah, so I also don't really touch internal comms, but I can also think of it again from the external media standpoint of when is the CEO a good spokesperson versus coaching them through having like a security engineer or someone. They are not,
Sure.
it really depends on that publication. Like a bleeping computer security researchers, that the technical audience is what's reading that. But I think when it's the C-level, just really making sure that they have the high strategy business messaging, which is actually quite hard because a lot of the founders and CEOs of cybersecurity companies are so in the weeds. It can be hard to really pull it back. I probably say this 15 times a day to like the C-level of just like pretend I'm a 5th grader and I've like just got my phone. How could you explain a ransomware attack to me in like 4 words? Or what's a simile we can use to really bring it down? Again, cybersecurity functions for that education layer, but figuring out the exact spokesperson for that audience is super critical for them to drive new business. And luckily, they're C-level is very receptive to that. They want to do what's best for the business. So that's really what I can speak to there. But I'm sure Alan and Conrad have better insight into internal comms because I've lived in agency for way too long.
Well, I don't know about better, but I would add to that, Sarah, because yes, couldn't agree more that boiling things down to the kindergarten level or just simplifying really complex topics, sometimes I feel like that it could be the strength of internal comms. A lot of times, external comms is not that internal isn't doing this also, but external is having to listen to compliance and legal and investor relations and the C-suite before they get a statement out the door. And by the time that statement is out the door, it doesn't say anything. Internal comms has a little bit more flexibility in speaking to the person or people they know best, which is the employees. And they also do a great job, I think, for most cases, in simplifying the big things that are happening at that organization in the what does it mean for my employees? And I think that sometimes that can be lost on the external side because your stakeholders are so vast. Internal is able to focus specifically on what does it mean for the people who work here. And oftentimes that means simplifying it. But one thing I encourage teams all the time is to build the bench of spokespeople. I have never come across an organization where I feel like it's a good idea for only one person to be talking. I think that most often your message is strengthened when you're showcasing a diverse set of voices, a diverse set of leaders, a diverse set of strengths and personality types within your organization. And I also think that's something that internal comms can often help with, and that they know those leaders, and not even just leaders, managers on down, frontline employees, people who are the closest to your ultimate client or to your member or to whoever that stakeholder customer is. Who are the closest people to that person, and can we get them sharing their story? Can we get them talking?
Yeah, and I think there's the component there of that person that is more direct with that other person. They're gonna actually know what does this mean specifically for that person, so they're able to translate that a little bit better. Where a certain message comes from someone super higher up. It's been a while since they've been in the day-to-day hassle of things, so they don't have that understanding exactly of how does this change impact me? What opportunities does it bring? Because I think everyone tries to think positively. I'd like to hope so. What are the opportunities that this brings? And, those are kind of conversations to have with your direct manager.
And just to build on that, it's something a word that we've used a few times now. It's trust. And who do those employees trust? And that's one thing that has not changed, since the days of dealing with crises in the fax machine and landline, right? People always trust their direct supervisor. So what is the cascading strategy, right? If your CEO is 5 or 7 levels away from you and they're speaking in the wrong terms, maybe a little bit too corporate, right? That message won't be as trusted as your immediate shift supervisor, who is in the same geographical area, the same building, works at the same time as you, that you know their story, right? There's an element of trust there. So again, it's trusting that source, and I think that's one of the keys when it comes to internal communications. There needs to be a cascading and at different levels, different elements of the message.
External side, you see that a lot of times in public affairs and politics. We a lot of DC public affairs firms like have these big names that can speak to different parties or segments within the party. But a lot of what we find are third-party authors that no one's heard of in a very specific state. So the mom, literally, we got a friend of mine, her whole digital presence is a Facebook page she barely uses. We got her into the Richmond Times-Dispatch, talking about her personal story, and put a little bit of a political spin in the very beginning, which I think is what got us the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Beyond that, it was just her story. And that I think did a lot more good because she's a nobody in the space, so to speak, that made her not look political. And again, whereas if the CEO of the clients, our client's a public affairs firm, if their client's CEO had written the same piece, it wouldn't have gotten placed because nobody cares about a national voice in a state outlet. And second, nobody would have believed it because it's just him or her trying to make a lot of money. But having these sort of little people make their arguments is actually why I posted about this on LinkedIn in an op-ed in Reclaim Politics, that's why data centers are being crushed, because they try to impress all the big important people, and they did. They got all the permits they wanted and everything, but they can't get zoning laws changed.
Yeah.
And that's what's causing them in communities across the country is they forgot about little people because they've tried to focus on the big important people, BIPs, the big important people instead.
Well, you see that on the campaign trail all the time, right? Everybody talks to Joe. Everybody repeats Joe's story and how Joe's story is connected to, their big public policy piece, right? You see it day in and day out on every campaign.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And back to how can communicators speak C-suite, or at least how can we help C-suite see our point of view? Oftentimes, I think it's our job to find those stories within our organization or within our client's organization or within the customers that are purchasing our products or however you want to look at that. It's always, I think, impressive to the C-suite when we can showcase a member story or a customer story or a client story and say, this is representative of what you're trying to get at. And now we can use this in our annual report. Now we can use this when you're speaking at a conference. Now we can use this when you're going to be at a podcast. Now we can use this in a new client meeting. Like if you are the person to bring those stories to life, and that can be the man on the street story or whatever it is, that is what reporters want. That's what your customer wants. That's what your shareholders want. And if you're the person that brings that to the executive, they're going to be impressed.
So you said something really interesting on the post that's above this video. I talked, but you can't just say media coverage. You can't just say open rates. You have to dial into what's happening with those open rates, who's opening it, why. So we had a conversation with a client recently. Her boss's boss, the CEO, they're desperate because of some leadership challenges, shall we say. So they said to her, go get some KPI from your PR agency. So they came to us and said, wanted to share a voice and how many outlets have you pitched? I said, well, that latter one is irrelevant and we don't care about share of voice, especially for a trucking and logistics company that is very blue ball in its focus. And especially with the company name being the same as a very common word that is used millions of times across this country. So what we did was say, actually, here's the KPIs you should care more about. For example, getting the op-ed in USA Today. Did your sales team get it? Did the biz dev team get it? Did the CEO get it to bring it to investors? When we got, this the Financial Times interview, were you able to bring that in a blog post so your team didn't take 2 hours? It took them half an hour. And those were KPIs. We actually gave them more KPIs to consider. But one, it put them all on our client, not on us, thank God. And second, they were all KPIs that she could translate to her CEO. And so I would like to spend a few minutes talking about translating specific measurements that we look at, comms jargon, but actually translating it not only to the C-suite, but also maybe if you have a point of contact, because they're the client point of contact, or you're in-house and there's someone above you who actually has that direct access. And so we'd love for any of you to speak to translating specific tactics and into bottom line measurements.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I think a point I was trying to make earlier, but then ended up making a completely different point, is with how cybersecurity leaders are so busy. Again, they're developing new things. They're constantly in their technology, the CTOs, everyone, like they're really stacked for time. Making a message short to them is so important, but again, driving it. So you need to, one, make it short enough that drives to the business goal. And two, because it's moving so fast, in PR, we know the best opportunities don't move that fast. So how can we tie it back to like that goal that we set 3 weeks ago? So for example, I have a client who really wants to get on broadcast, which is a great big goal. And hopefully we'll get there for him, of course. But so every time we do have any progress, concisely writing how that specific tactic ties back to that goal. So had a great coffee chat with the ABC reporter today, then saying this is helping us get to that longer lead goal of X, because again, with cyber C levels, they want results a lot more faster because they're moving so fast. So just being able to show them the little results and how long it takes and eventually to get there, and teaching them a little bit that way.
So I would say, again, going back to my 5 points at the beginning of the show, right? Knowing the strategy better than the head of strategy. The second part is that environment, right? So who are the stakeholders that really matter to this company in that moment, right? If you say KPIs and you go, well, I want the company to be projected well and have great perception. Well, okay, but are you asking us to boil the ocean, or are you really interested in 2, 3 key stakeholder groups. And knowing that, and then being able to translate that back into the language of numbers that the C-suite wants, that data, right? How would that impact the quarterly stakeholder report, right? What are the actions that you could take for maybe that group that you're really concerned about whether or not they're going to buy that product? Or, you know, there's something else happening over here that's going to slow down part of the production cycle, or anything, any of those issues, right? So again, it goes back to knowing the strategy, understanding the environment, and then asking those questions about, well, when you ask me that, who exactly do you want to talk to? I can run a national campaign, but if you really want to get deep penetration, you know, that campaign might cost you 20, 25 million. If you want to speak to 3, 4 key stakeholder groups in this region, that region, or the other, then, you know, that can be really targeted and much easier to achieve.
The one thing I'll add that I think is always a challenge for communicators, because we are moving so fast and because we are responding to the demands of not just one senior leader, but likely 5, 10, 15, who knows how many. You are caught sort of chasing their priorities and having to respond to their priorities every single day. And so I remember when I was in-house, a struggle that we would all have is documenting how the comms team, how communicators were delivering on all of these priorities of the C-suite. And oftentimes that would be saved until annual review time. So you would be going back and saying, all right, over the last 12 months, what did we do as the comms team to make sure that Sally, Joe, and Sarah's priorities were achieved by us and our team? And sadly, I know you don't have time to do that, but if there is a way, and I think AI has made this easier for us, to provide more timely updates of this is what you wanted, this is what we did, this is how we're making that a priority moving forward, or however you want to phrase that, and giving that to your C-suite 4 times a year. Hopefully by the time the end of the year rolls around and there aren't fingers pointed at you as to show me your value, what did you do again? How are you helping me? Those regular updates for you, like waving the banner of the communications team, will show them that you're listening and that you're responsive and that you really are connected with them as a partner.
I would add one thing to that, which is make sure that that happens early and often, and especially before budgets are decided.
Yes. Yes.
Because, you know, you flash back to my corporate days, Ellen, right? That was exactly it. They look around the room and they go, well, operations is doing this, HR is doing that. Oh, yeah. So, you know, my discretionary spend is comms and PR. So
Yep.
you guys are taking the biggest hit.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So that report and that value added needs to be known early and often, and hopefully will help you expand your budget instead of having just to defend it or walk out of the room with less of it.
And we always say you can't over communicate, but it's hard for us to do that for ourselves, selling ourselves. Yeah.
So, and Sarah, you want to talk about agentic AI, so I do want to make sure we make space for that. But as we're talking here, I'm thinking about the word no, and I've posted this. I could get a whole lot better about this. I posted about it on LinkedIn, but I think there's to your point, Ellen, as you were about to say, trying to get everyone's priorities, I was thinking she's going to talk about us being spread too thin as comms teams. And I wonder, part of the value here, you used to work for United Health. I mean, there's been very few companies under more crisis than United Healthcare in the last 3 years, right? Between the unpopularity of PBMs in the broad public, with lawmakers, with the pharmaceutical battle that's going on there, but also the murder of the CEO. I mean, there's no company that has faced probably more pressure from a trust and brand perspective than United Healthcare. If you have eight, again, I've never worked in corporate comms, so I'm partly just spitballing here, but if there are eight people who all want your attention and you say, hold on, the CEO said this is our biggest challenge because the new CEO, because we just saw our boss get murdered and everyone's trying to ban us across these different states, and pharmaceutical companies are saying that we're evil because we vertically integrated. Why don't we, you're all not, the CEO is actually the one who has the right idea, or the COO. How important is it to say no to the ideas that are a distraction and redirect that attention so that you are being seen as a yes and or no and person rather than being pulled, and take ownership of that role? And again, I can say that as an agency person who does a very specific thing, PR. I don't know if that's harder when you're in-house, Ellen and Conrad.
Yeah, I think going back to Conrad and Ellen's point on that's when you really need to ask the questions. Like
Yeah.
what is it you're trying to get to? And then having proof, research data that backs up exactly why that might not get the outcome he's or she is hoping for.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, I absolutely agree with what Sarah said. I think the communicator's role at the end of the day is to ask the question of what is our end goal here? And in a case like United Healthcare, it's enhancing and improving trust. And if we are going to enhance and improve trust in our company, a lot of times that falls on the communicator to say, how are we going to do that? Well, number one, we need to spotlight more of the members who are receiving really solid care, who are really happy with our work, who have a relationship with their nurse case manager that comes to their home every day, that is holding their child's hand. Like, we need to do more of that. We need to broaden our bench of spokespeople so that they're seeing that this company is not just led by one man, but a variety of clinicians who are working in the communities that they serve, who are partnering with the Department of Medicaid to figure out how to expand access, not restrict it. You know, all of those different factors come into play for a company like them. But what I would say is oftentimes it's the communicators who are helping lead that charge, because we know, as Conrad mentioned in the very beginning of this call, what is being said on the outside. A lot of C-suite executives have spent a long time in their companies. You know, this isn't exclusive to healthcare. I think we see this in defense. I think we see this in finance. I think we see this in nonprofit, in energy, everywhere, where you'll see someone at the top in the C-suite and they've been in that organization for 20 years. Well, it's our role as the communicator to say, this is what's happening on Reddit. This is what people are saying on whatever platform is important to your business, but to bring some of those oftentimes ugly truths to life to help improve the business and make it more responsive and more trustworthy.
I would just say the boardroom is not the place to say no, right? You have to create the opportunity to say no before that meeting. And it's by understanding the environment in which you're operating, right? What Ellen described, right? And knowing all of the positive pieces that you can bring forward. That's really understanding the operating environment that you're in. And you get that through that cross-functional knowledge and speaking with the different members of the C-suite beforehand. I think any communicator who walks in and, you know, basically if it's brought up at the board meeting or at the executive level meeting, it's because the decision's been made and they're going to tell you, we want this. Then is not the time to say no, right? You had to have built up to that. In that meeting, maybe ask some questions about what are we trying to accomplish as an outcome, but I wouldn't lead with no. You could change it later, but I wouldn't lead with no in the meeting.
And I think this brings up a really important point that as communicators, and I don't want to make it sound like we have the toughest job, but I do feel like we have one of the toughest jobs. we are walking on a razor's edge because on one hand, you are looked to be your organization's biggest advocate, but on the other hand, you are its biggest critic. And I think that is the hard part about being a communicator, especially in-house, but also as an agency, because your value is in pointing out those flaws and helping incorporate a response that will be accepted by the public. And so I think that you are feeling sometimes like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, and you don't want to be looked at as the no person, or the person who doesn't get it, or the person who isn't all in, or the person who isn't the biggest cheerleader. It's just like holding both of those personalities in one space, in one body.
Which is where I think asking questions is really important. To your point, Conrad, you can't just say no in the boardroom. We get requests from clients on a regular basis. Can you make this one work? And we're just like, no. And here's why. But we often will lead with, in the conversation, email, it's a little bit different. We can say, actually, that won't work for these reasons. How about this instead? But a lot of times live, I've been forced to learn rather than just give an answer, is because of I've read Chris Voss's book on negotiation at least 4 times, is lead with a question. Okay, how is that going to achieve the goal that you have previously stated? Oh, it's going to do it this way. Okay, how will this impact this audience that you want to reach to hit that goal? And asking them those questions, and you summarize. So it seems like you're okay with annoying this audience that you said is key over here. No, that's not what I meant. By asking those questions, you are not seen as aggressive. You're simply walking them to the answer that you figured out 6 questions ago. So I want to close, Sarah. You wanted to talk about agentic AI. So why don't you lead us on our last topic here, but we have to wrap up.
Yeah, I think one of our more modern roles as communicators speaking to the C-level is being that educator for EEO, showcasing how exactly how PR is being used to influence these search engines. A lot of people are now using search engines to make purchasing decisions, whether it's through research. And I think, don't quote me on this, I believe it's like 23% have already started to purchase directly through agentic commerce. So that's a huge sales factor. You're seeing kind of PR be more directly involved in sales for the first time, instead of, on top of building the trust and reputation, obviously, but also you are having that more direct impact in sales. So we have to also stay on the pulse because everything's changing. So like I know Globe Newswire, Muckrack put out as the most out of all the press release syndication sites, has the most that are getting pulled into these generative AI platforms. But tomorrow that could be completely different. And if you look at the full picture, step it back, really press releases are only 1% of what they're pulling. So figuring out what's worth that change for them, making that strategic decision for them, and how to make sure that you are getting into the search engines of your audience is not tougher, and it's changing every day. So just, for us, it's hard, but obviously just staying informed and keeping up on the latest data that is out there. And even just like we can work together with the C-level. Again, where are you seeing those links getting clicked? Are they clicking on the earned media? Are they clicking on the is like ChatGPT putting up a link that they're clicking on? Are they coming through Reddit from just people in the community talking about your research? Like just figuring that stuff out is super important. But yeah, I'm excited to see kind of what it goes because obviously it's still very much unfolding.
I'm not an AI expert, so I got nothing to add on
All right.
that.
Want to talk about AI vulnerabilities now? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Sarah, right? On AI, with the platforms changing every day, right? There was a formula not that long ago on how to maximize LinkedIn posts and how the algorithms would work. That's been changing, right? The company's changing it. It's not as it's not the same as it was, and it will continue to evolve. How is AI potentially attacking your company? And all of a sudden you think all of these people are against me on this one issue. And then when you actually start to mine the data, you realize they're not real people. It's AI driven either by, another state or, a competitor. There's all of these things that are happening with AI where, again, maybe it's not the comms team that's leading it, but if you're really close with the CIO and their teams, right, you're able to have those conversations, ask those questions, influence the policies that they are developing to make sure that your company is able to, one, take advantage of what AI brings, but then also react to what AI brings.
Mhm.
So to wrap up here, I want to ask a quick round robin question. If it's a question, I have an opinion. I'd like to just jump in on it, which is what are the things? So I've been very active on LinkedIn for almost 2.5 years, and something I saw for the first 15 to 20 months was a lot of people saying leaders don't understand our value, founders don't get our value, founders are a bunch of idiots on marketing and branding. I would say it's 95% of companies don't have effective marketing and branding strategies. And of the remaining 5%, 80% of them probably aren't very good at it. But because they're actually doing it, they stand out comparatively. I wonder if one of the biggest mistakes a lot of communicators make is walking in with the assumption that instead of it being I'm going to help teach the C-suite the value of communications, it's maybe a resentment or why am I at the little kids' table? And again, I've never worked in corporate comms. A lot of people that I have met through LinkedIn who have said there is a serious problem at the C-suite, Dustin. They haven't said you don't get it, but I clearly don't get it. But I wonder if there is a problem of resentment and frustration that comes out when communicators finally are beginning to get that kind of access that reduces our ability to think creatively and think positively and be forward-looking. I'd like all your reactions to that.
Yeah, I don't think you're far off there, Dustin, in terms of how communicators have been perceived in the past, or are presently being perceived. But to your point from the very beginning, this most recent Wall Street Journal article pointed out the many ways in which that is changing. Even just looking at the relationship of CCOs reporting directly to the CEO is increasing year after year after year. So I think we have a lot of proof points. I was just talking to an agency owner yesterday who said, and I agreed with him, 10 years ago, public relations was shaking, thinking, is this the end? Are we
Right.
are we losing footing to the paid side, marketing and advertising? They're getting the big budgets and we're just being, the order takers per Rachel's comment earlier. And now I think due in part to AI, that's shifting. Earned media is getting its strength back, and we're proving our value in a variety of ways every day. So I think it's going into those meetings with your head held high and looking for ways to prove your value and to be that trusted partner.
The situation you described, Dustin, is I don't think it's up to the C-suite to view things from a comms perspective or expect that they will understand it from a comms perspective. It goes back to the premise of this session. It's us speaking C-suite. It's meeting them where they are and interpreting what we bring to them in language that they can quickly understand, comprehend, package. And so that is that transition that has to happen as you move up in the communications world. You need to build your business acumen. We're experts in what we do. We need to translate that into the business impact, translate that into the business opportunity, translate that into how you're minimizing the business risk. Once you do that, then you've got them in a conversation. If you try and get them in a conversation on the basic comms pieces, you're not at the right level.
Sense. Sarah, you're going to finish us off.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Conrad and Ellen really had kind of all the points that I was gonna make. Super agree with, again, it's just translating, um, speaking their lingo, and again with the even going back to AEO, figuring out how to fit AEO into the lingo that they understand. It's like developers are on Reddit and Reddit's being pulled into ChatGPT, and that's where your buyer's going to find out if you're the best and or cheapest in, I don't know, identity security, So totally agree with both Conrad and Ellen there. But yeah, and of course, it's a challenge to translate something that's so new and continuing to evolve all the time, but that's what we're good at. So they do need us, right?
Mhm.
They do need us, even if we are part of the discretionary budget.
Yep.
Got to
Well,
show
I gotta
value.
jump.
Got to show value.
Gotta show value. I gotta jump, unfortunately. And so thank you everyone for being patient with me running a little late today. Conrad, nice to finally meet you. Sarah, nice to finally see you. Ellen, good to see you again. And folks, this was a lot of fun. I really
Was.
appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thanks for having me.
This was great.
Be well.